We have a lecture about plant structure and evolution and scientific terminology by biologist Ville Heimala. And then we also have a plant structure and function workshop. Then we'll have a little break. And after that, chef and entrepreneur Sasu Laukkonen will join us also through Teams. He will talk about the communication and storytelling. And then I believe later, together with Norway and Denmark and Finland, we will decide the exact dates about the scientific terminology exam, which will be sometime in August and September. But we will give more information about that by next month, the latest. All right, so I think we can get started. All right, Ville.
Okay. Hello. So my name is Ville Heimala, and I'm a biologist. I'm also an exhibition designer, and I have designed exhibitions for example, Finnish Museum of Natural History. So actually at the moment I'm also a sculptor, so I've done many things, and I've also drawn some of the illustrations in this lecture. The topic is partly quite heavy, so I'm trying to put maybe some jokes in between. I'm hoping that I won't be seeing any yawnings or maybe droopy eyes. Well, sorry. Yeah, so I'm going to tell you about plants, their evolution, morphology, and classification. Morphology means structure. Well, what is a plant actually? The first things that we could maybe call plants were actually bacteria, so-called cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. They were the first organisms that were able to obtain energy from the sun by using photosynthesis. And then by this process, they could produce sugars for energy. Actually, you might think of blue-green algae that they are this nasty green stuff that floats on top of lakes and the ocean in summertime, but actually we can thank them for all the oxygen in our atmosphere. That's what they have originally done. Well, the cyanobacteria were so good at obtaining or making energy that actually other single-celled organisms, like in this picture, they sucked the cyanobacteria inside them, and the cyanobacteria became these chloroplasts of all modern plants. So the first single-celled algae were formed like this. And then later, when single-celled algae divide by cell division, the cells did not completely detach from each other, so they formed this kind of threads or ribbons or maybe globes like here, and they were the first multicellular algae. The first plants that came on land were really small and slender, or maybe moss-like, or even kind of thin filaments, and they were dependent on vicinity of water because they didn't have any roots for sucking water, so they had to be close to water on shore or places like that. Well, eventually the plants on land started growing, and while the thickening of the vegetation accelerated, the competition of light and space became more severe. And originally, land plants had this kind of symmetrical growth habit. Like here is the modern whisk fern that has, it's kind of branching symmetrically, so it makes some kind of fan. And here is also the drawing of the original branching type. So you can't grow very big that way. So an innovation was to start to grow asymmetrically. So this sort of sounds like, of course, it should be that way, but it wasn't originally that way. So the formation of stem and the tip that is growing higher and higher. So that was possible because some plants developed roots that can suck water and nutrients out of ground, and also these tubular vascular cells that could kind of lead the water and nutrients all over the plant. So the vegetation grew on and got thicker and thicker and taller, which caused that the amount of CO2 or CO2 in the atmosphere sunk or lowered. And therefore, in order to get more energy or more CO2, the plants had to get more surface for photosynthesis. And that's when they started growing these flattened branches, which eventually made this fusion, or they fused together, which formed leaves. And leaves have lots of surface that plants can use for photosynthesis. So making, it's okay. Yeah. Now, a bit more about plant evolution soon, but first we can take a look at basic structure of plants. The different parts have different main functions. First, roots, as I told you, suck water and nutrients from the ground. The stem is for the growth of the plant. It gets higher and bigger, and also it's for transportation of the nutrients and other materials throughout the plant. The leaves are the most energy, or the parts where most of the energy is produced by photosynthesis. And flowers are basically for reproduction. Well, there are some parts, especially because we're speaking English, they might not be so familiar for you. So I'll go through these different parts. Well, roots, for example, there is this primary root, which is the first root that the plant develops when it starts growing, or it may be also called tap root. And then there are usually several secondary roots. Then the leaf has usually two parts, the petiole and the blade, that is a flat part. Then in the leaf axis, so in the place where the leaf joins the stem, there are buds or axillary buds, which may grow further into secondary shoots. This is the primary shoot. Leaves also might have, in the leaf axis, there might be this small leaf kind of structures, so-called stipules. And then the flower and several flowers forms inflorescence. I'll get to these flowers a bit later. Well, something about plants' basic requirements, growth, and storing water and energy for future. Well, plants are modular organisms, which means that they consist of smaller modules or parts that can be added, and the plant can grow by adding modules more and more. Unlike us, we have, well, 2 legs and 2 arms, and we won't get any more of those if we grow. This modularity is a good thing because it can be used for asexual reproduction. So plant can detach part from itself, and they have the same genetic code or same, they are the same individual, and they just start growing by their own. So basically, asexual reproduction, the new plants that are done by that are clones of the mother plant. Here are some examples of asexual reproduction, many of which we are interested in food-wise also. Some plants have this underground stem called rhizome, which can produce new shoots of plants, and also these parts may sometimes detach from each other, and so you get new individuals of the same plant. They may produce these adventitious roots. So when you detach the plant and plant it into ground, it will start growing new roots and become an individual. Then some plants have tubers, which are also energy preserves, and they can detach and grow on. Some plants grow stolons or runners. They sort of plant new parts of themselves into slightly another direction. Then rhizomes can be also quite thick and filled with starch for storing material or energy for future. And here is an example of a plant with a bulb. And they plants also can have these axillary bulbils, so these tiny bulbs that can fall down or fall off and root and form another individual. But in all of these cases, the new plants have the same genetic material in themselves. Here is a clone of bananas. Bananas are not produced from seed, but they're cut off by rhizomes or new stems. So, for example, 2 varieties of bananas, Dwarf Cavendish and Grand 9, cover like majority of all the bananas that are grown in the world. So just 2 individuals cover most of the bananas in the world. That's quite something. Yeah, the problem is because they all have the same genetic code in them, they also have the same resistance for different kinds of diseases. So if, for example, if there is a really severe disease for Dwarf Cavendish, it will probably kill all the bananas, all the Dwarf Cavendish bananas, because they are the same individual. So I think that really might be a problem. Yep. Yeah, but the cloning is not the answer, because if it's a clone, they have the same. But like crossbreeding, they could crossbreed like wild bananas, for example, to get some more genetic material and more resistance for diseases. Yeah, it is a case, but actually I don't know if it was if it was the dwarf Cavendish or this grand name, but definitely it was a thread at least. I don't know where we're going now at the moment with that thing. Yeah. Storing water and energy. It's preparing for unstable conditions. For example, in dry areas, plants want to preserve water. And for example, here where we have winter, and in wintertime plants cannot grow, so they have to preserve energy for the next year in order to stay alive over winter. Well, if they are perennial plants. Here is an example of storing water. The water can be stored, for example, in a stem, like here in a cactus, or in leaves, like here in agave plant. Then for storing energy in form of starch is usually made by tubers. Here is a root tuber that is formed in roots. For example, sweet potato does this. And then stem tubers, they might be in stolons or runners, like here in the potato, or in this rhizome, like in ginger. Then there are different kinds of taproot modifications, like this, for example, in carrot. Or here, taproot and also some of the stem has become a tuber. All the tuber can be kind of part of stem completely also. Then there are these special cases, bulbs. Here, for example, is an onion, and the bulb or the energy preserve is formed by the bases of leaves. And here is lily with these specialized leaves that form the bulb. So some more of this evolution of plants. I'm really sorry, there are lots of scientific terminology in this, and they don't kind of have at least these common names. You might want to look for terms for your native language from the internet, because at least in Finnish they have proper names and not these that are from Latin or ancient Greek, as here in English. Well, originally plants reproduced with spores, which are sort of small, dry particles that grow into another plant, and it has the same genetic material as the mother plant. Of spore plants, here is an example. This is a fern, which has this sporangia, which produce spores, and they are in the leaves. These spores develop into a prothallus or a gametophyte. Gametophyte means a plant, phyte is plant, and gameto is gametes, so sex cells basically. So prothallus is a plant that produces sex cells. In these plants that reproduce with spores, there are two kinds of plants. So the one, in this case the fern, that produces the spores, and then the one that produces gametes or sex cells, in this case the prothallus. So the prothallus looks very different from the spore-bearing plant, and it produces sperm and eggs. And then there is this fertilization of the eggs by sperm then forms an embryo that starts to grow, like here, into a new fern or sporophyte plant that produces spores. Sounds a bit complicated, right? But that's the original way how plants did it. However, this kind of reproduction requires water here, otherwise the sperm cannot swim to the egg. Well, then the seed plants found a way to make these drought-tolerant seeds. Now, here we have a sporophyte, a plant that produces spores, a bit same way as here with the fern. And there are these specialized leaves that produce the sporangia, that produce the spores. And they're called ovules. Now this is a mega sporophyll because it makes spores that make female gametophytes, or the sex cell producing plants. And I'm going to tell you how it works in this female gametophytes. Am I boring you? Good. Yeah, so this is a cross-section of this ovule. Inside the ovule, there is this sporangium that produces just one spore. But the spore won't fly away like in these ferns, but it stays inside the ovule. And then in another leaf, maybe in another plant, is another kind of structure, microsporophyll, which produces pollen grain that has sperm cells inside it. So the pollen grain goes here into the ovule and fertilizes the egg. The spore here has grown into this female gametophyte, and the female gametophyte produces this egg. So after the pollination, the egg starts to grow into an embryo, and this is now the new plant. And all the structure with all these layers form seed. And this is a good thing because there is this hard shell around the seed, so it's very drought tolerant. So seed can just spread somewhere and start to grow whenever the conditions are right, basically. These first seed plants were called gymnosperms. For example, conifer trees belong to this, and also cycads, which look a bit like palms. Here is a megasporophyll, or a female spore or seed producing leaf. And you can see here the seeds that have been formed like this, along with the sporophyll, or the female leaf. And originally they were like this, freely, but then later the sporophylls were gathered into these cone structures. So each of these cone scales is a megasporophyll with 1 or 2 seeds on the base. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well then, the next innovation was, because in gymnosperms, gymno means naked. These sperms or seeds are here on the megasporophyll leaves, just like this. So they are exposed to everything. The next idea was to that plants coiled the megasporophyll that we call carpel now. The carpel coiled around the seeds, and then it was closed like this, and it formed a pistil, which is the basic female part of modern angiosperms, so flowering plants. Here is a flower of magnolia, and magnolias are one of the most primitive plants or flowering plants still existing. And here is a close-up of the flower. The pistils are here, and the male parts, stamens, are here that produce pollen. And inside this pistil, there are these ovules that will eventually grow into seeds. As you can see here, the pistil leaf starts to crack open, and you can see the seeds inside there eventually. In some cases, these pistils may fuse together like this, and then several pistils form this kind of uniform structure, for example, berry, where you can't really tell where the different pistils are situated. So this is some sort of a fruit. Well, let's take a look at flower a bit more closely. This is really just a scratch of the topic, but just to see the basic parts of the flower, I told you about these pistils that have these ovules that will turn into seeds eventually. So here the pistils are marked with this brown color, and there might be several pistils in one flower, and they stand on this part called receptacle. This is an interesting part, as we will see later. And then there are stamens that produce the pollen or pollination of the male part. Then there are usually petals around the flower that are colorful very often. Many plants rely on insects and other pollinators to do the pollination job. So they often have petals that have a certain kind of color that attracts pollinators. Most plants are pollinated by bees, by the way. So bees are very important. And then there are sepals, which are the outer leaf type of a flower. Quite often the sepals cover the whole bud to protect it before it will open and the stamens and pistils come visible. And the flower has this short stem under it, which is called pedicel. Well, there are many kinds of inflorescences. So inflorescence is a group of flowers. There are, for example, cymes and racemes and spikes. Wheat would make something like this, for example, or umbels or head. These heads are quite interesting because they have a base with lots of small flowers. This is a sunflower. It's a flower head. It looks like a single flower, but there are actually hundreds of flowers like jammed together in this composite inflorescence. There are two types of flowers in here. There are tubular flowers in the middle, which take care of reproduction. And then there are these tongue-like ray flowers on the edges, where their petals have fused together to make this, well, tongue kind of thing. They are not for reproduction, but they are for attracting pollinators. So in many cases in plants, you have to look carefully in order to understand what is really going on in the plant structure. Well, fruits. Fruits are things that the flowers produce. So inside a fruit, there are seeds. You might have another idea what fruit means, something maybe to do with culinary things, but actually all sexual products that plants make that have seeds inside them are called fruits botanically. Also, there are, for example, berries, and in botanic terms, they have specific meaning. It's not the same as in culinary, for example. There are many ways to classify fruits, and I'm telling you this way. There are just a couple of some main classifications of different kinds of fruits, and there are more of these, but I'll just going to show you some of them. There are so-called dry fruits and fleshy fruits. Dry fruits can be divided into decent and indecent fruits. The decent ones will open up. They might have one carpel or several carpels. Remember, carpels were the leaves that bear the seeds, the ovules that will become seeds. Well, one carpel, for example, legumes, like the pea family, they may have 2 seams when it opens up, and follicle has 1 seam. So these are just terms to classify types of fruits. Well, then several carpels. There are, for example, silic that has 2 carpels, like in mustard family, and then this thing called capsule. And there are different ways that it can open. You might recognize this one, the bulbous in the middle, as a poppy seed capsule. Well, then there are these indecent fruits, dry fruits that stay closed. Well, of course, they will crack open when the seed starts to germinate, but they won't kind of open and spread the seeds away. And in this kind of fruits, there are usually just 1 seed inside the fruit, just 1 seed inside the fruit. For example, achenes, like this. There is this is dandelion achene. You might think it's dandelion seed, but it's just partly true. It's a fruit, hard fruit that won't open, and there is 1 seed inside it, and there is also this flying apparatus in this achene fruit. Then there is this schizocarp, which is a special type of fruit in the carrot family. And then so-called true nut, which is a large, indecent, dry fruit with just 1 seed. Actually, many things that you call nuts are not really nuts, because they won't work like this. Quite often they are just seeds. Well, then there are fleshy fruits, which you might think are the real fruits. They are also indecent, so they stay closed, but because they are fleshy and soft, they will fall apart. Usually these fleshy fruits are meant for eating. So, for example, for some animal that will eat this fleshy fruit, and the seeds will go through the digestive system, and then when the animal poops them out, they have this nice uh, fertilization package around them to be able to start growing. There are basically two types of fleshy fruits, a berry or a true berry that usually has several seeds inside it. And then there is drupe, which has one hard seed. I will show you soon what this drupe actually means. And then there are aggregate fruits, for example, strawberry here. And in this case, it's an aggregate drupe which consists of tiny drupelets. Inside each one of them is one hard seed. And then there are accessory fruits that are not fruits at all. One example is here, strawberry. This accessory fruit here is the one that we're interested in, that we want to eat, and it is actually the receptacle where the pistils that form the real fruits are attached to. And the fruit, the fruit that of strawberry are actually achenes. So they are these hard, indecent fruits that are on top of this accessory fruit. Yeah, and then, for example, apple and pear have this structure called pome, and most of the pome is also from the receptacle, and then there is this capsule kind of structure, which is the real fruit inside there. Quite often it's really hard to know which part of fruit or accessory fruit comes from which. So these are just examples for you to kind of take another view to fruit and think what they really are. This is like a basic structure or layers of a fruit here. And there's this inner layer and middle layer and outer layer. And depending on which plant we're talking about, the so-called edible part can be from any of these layers, actually. Now, I told you about this drupe, which is, for example, plums and cherries and peaches. The thing that we call stone or seed, actually, the hard outer layer of the stone is part of the fruit itself. This inner layer, or endocarp to be precise. And the seed is on, if you open the stone, you find the seed inside it, which it has much softer shell. Well, here is an example of a citrus berry, which is called Hesperidium. And the part that we eat out of it is actually fluid-filled hairs that are formed by the inner layer, the endocarp. And then quite often it's really hard to say which part is which. Here is a passion fruit, and all the other layers are actually really kind of hard and leathery in the passion fruit, but the part that we want to eat is the stuff around the seeds, which is called aril. It's an outgrowth from inside the seed, and that's the part that we want to eat. Later we'll take a look at these examples on the table, where we have these real plants for inspection. And here, again, these are real berries, the tomato berries. Here you can also see that there are green tomatoes and these reddish tomatoes, because these are berries that are meant for eating. It's essential that they must be ripe before they are eaten. So that's why, like many fruits, berries and drupes and such are, before they're ready for eating, they are green and inconspicuous. They might smell bad, and they're really hard usually, and might also taste really bad. So they're not very appetizing. But usually then they change color. Maybe they start smelling quite nice and taste nice and become soft. And that means that the seeds are ready inside and you can eat them and then poop them out. And you shouldn't bite the seeds because they will destroy that way. Well, that's the reason why sometimes plants want that specific animal will eat the berries, because in some other animals, it might happen that the animal kind of bites also the seeds, so there's no point for the plant in that thing. Or the animal might go to wrong place for defecation. So, for example, underground, very deep, so that would be a place where the plant couldn't really, or the seed couldn't really germinate and start growing. Well, yeah, there is something about seeds themselves. Yeah, the seeds have some basic structures. The most important part is the embryo that starts to grow into a new plant. And then there's this cotyledon, which is the very first leaf that will come out of the plant when it starts growing. There are usually 1 or 2 cotyledons in plants. And then there is endosperm, which basically is the energy storage for germination. And the energy can be preserved in form of starch or oil, for example. Here you can see barley fruits. They have starch as energy. So starch is these long-chained sugars, and when the plant starts to germinate, enzymes will cut these starch strains into smaller particles of sugars. You know, the same thing that happens if you malt barley, for example. It becomes sweet, so the starch is cut into sugars, smaller particles. Or here are some sunflower achenes, so hard nut kind of fruit that will not open. And inside them are seeds that use oil as energy storage, as you probably have heard of sunflower oil. Or there can be also combinations of these two. And yes, seeds are normally not meant to be eaten. But in some cases, plants produce so many seeds that it's beneficial for them that some of them are eaten, and some of them might be, for example, hidden somewhere. You know, the squirrels hide acorns, for example, and they forget where all the hidden acorns are. So for the oak tree, it's okay if most of the seeds are eaten, if some of them are actually planted around and they start to germinate and grow later. And also in case of this barley, we grow barley. So for the barley, it's okay that we eat most of them, their seeds, but we still keep some of them and grow them, and they kind of go on that way. So you might think that we're exploiting the barley plant, but maybe the barley is exploiting us, because barley and especially wheat is one of the most widespread plant species on Earth. Yeah, think of that. Well, then there are some other plants' basic requirements. Defending against herbivores, for example. Basically, plants don't want to be eaten up. So they might have some structures, mechanical structures that prevent plant eaters or herbivores from eating them. They might have a tough surface. Well, here's the Brazil nut, which is so tough that actually just one mammal, agouti, can eat or get inside the Brazil nut to get the seeds. Well, humans also, but that's a different thing. Then there might be some spines, for example, here in agave plant or cacti. You wouldn't even go close to a very, very prickly cactus. Or there might be some hairs, or some plants don't look like plants at all. They're inconspicuous, or they might be even unedible. For example, in grasses, there are these silica particles which make them really hard to chew on. And to be able to chew on grasses, you have to be, for example, a horse, because horses' teeth are growing all the time, and the silica particles will grind the teeth all the time. Yeah, so grasses are tough to eat. And then there might be some chemical defending. We call them often etherical oils. There are also things like capsaicin or mustard compounds or sulfur compounds or other bitter stuffs, coumarin, organic acids, and so on. These are usually for insects to prevent them from eating these plants. But we quite often like these things because we can use them as spices or herbs in cooking. For us, many of them are not poisonous, but some are. For example, here is cowbane, which is very poisonous to all mammals. But some species in the same family are eaten quite happily. For example, carrots. What time? Should we have a short break right now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Maybe just 5 or 10 minutes? 5-ish.
We continue at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell Norway and Denmark will start in 5 minutes.
Okay, so we'll continue in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. I think it's 1 o'clock in Norway, Denmark time, and then 2 o'clock in Finland. So short break.